Welcome to Something to Talk About from the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center. We do this Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and other times as well. We're sponsored by Fieldstone Memory Care of Bainbridge Island, which offers innovative and compassionate care, and they're now accepting residents. If you would like to schedule a tour, or if you'd like to learn about their day stay or respite programs, call 360-689-4314. And I'd also like to acknowledge that the Senior Center is on the ancestral homeland of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Suquamish tribe, the people of the clear salt water. We honor them and we are grateful for their hospitality. We're also grateful to have a great group of people here today to talk about Earth Day and sustainable Bainbridge and sustainable living. So Anne Lovejoy, would you be willing to start us off? And we also have Diane, Landry, and Barbara Ochota here.
Right, and thank you so much for joining us. And thanks everybody for showing up and everybody who sees this later. I did want to start right off by saying that one of the best ways we can protect the planet as property owners of any kind or as citizens is by healing the soil to the best of our ability. Because one of the biggest problems we have today is the fact it's very, very basic. We are takers, and we take and make and use products of the earth and don't give back, and we don't mend and heal. And that has really created huge issues for us. And the good news is that some very small measures, which seem like nothing, can actually add up to quite a bit. For instance, one of the biggest issues we have is water runoff from watered lawns tends to be really full of pesticides and herbicides, which get into every single waterway in Washington state is contaminated and has been for at least 30 years. So, using natural lawn care instead of toxic weed and feed products is a huge win for everybody, right? And the other thing is natural lawn care actually works better. It gives you healthier, stronger grass with deeper roots. There's been a number of studies that have shown like a healthy lawn that's grown with what we call benign neglect, just, mowed, given compost raked in once or twice a year, will have roots that can go as much as 18 or 20 inches. Whereas an overfed, overwatered lawn might have roots that are only 2 or 3 inches, so they're not resilient at all. So cleaning up your yard care, switching over to natural care is a great way to start being a lot more earth friendly. The other thing is to consider that basically nothing you can plant needs to be mowed every week, cut in half and have half of it thrown away on a regular basis. There's just no other plant that requires that. So thinking about shrinking your lawn and putting in pollinator-friendly patches instead is a much better, more friendly way to go. And one of the best things about it is it's something that's a really great family project and good to do with kids and grandkids, neighbors, and digging up the grass, turning it over, letting that turf rot away into compost, digging up, you don't even have to dig. That's the coolest part. Just bring in some topsoil or put some compost down and start planting plants that will benefit pollinators and birds. One of the coolest things about some of the ancient Native American gardens that are being discovered along the West Coast is that they were designed specifically for birds, bears, and people. I love that. So then they're reciprocal, and that those gardens have persisted for several hundred years, if not longer, means they were really well planted with native plants that are extremely resilient. And that's something to think about too. Native plants are not just dull, boring things we put in to be righteous. They're actually great to benefit this huge range of living creatures that inhabit this land besides us people, right? So making that kind of garden is a really good way to go. Adrian, did you have a question?
Yes. What about just so we here where our lawn is, we don't water it. We just let it go, do whatever it does in the summer. And but we do try and go and dig up dandelions or whatever. But there's a lot of clover patches and moss patches that grow. I mean, is that fine? I like that. Is that, does that qualify?
Well, yeah, here's the interesting thing. So clover flourishes where the soil is poor in nutrients, especially in nitrogen. And they're natural nitrogen fixtures like alders and Scotch broom. They extract nitrogen from the air and store it in little nodules on their roots. And when you pull them up, you'll see these little white, they look like teeny tiny pop beads on the roots. And those are stored nitrogen, which they will then release to the soil. So what that means is you have low nutrient soil, and it's heavy,
Definitely.
and it's sour. And where you have moss, it's a better idea to have like a moss garden with some ferns than to try to have turf, which really requires a very different kind of situation. And instead of taking out the dandelions, consider that they're great pollinator plants and are actually do no harm at all.
There's so many.
Yeah, that's okay. You know, they're quite lovely in the spring, right? They're beautiful little creatures. Interestingly, the American dandelions have been bred by generations of being mowed to grow flat in flat rosettes, but European dandelions, I keep saying that, grow straight up. And they've never been bred to flatness. Isn't that funny? But anyway, that's just one thing you can do. The other piece that's huge, it's very simple, is to just make sure that any bare soil anywhere in your property gets covered with compost. As little as a 1/4 inch of compost can begin drawing down carbon and storing carbon in a matter of days. Some really recent research has shown how effective that is, and that bare earth starts dying as soon as it gets scraped clean, or, you know, people blow it with those machines. That just, it's like a tsunami coming in. It kills the soil bacteria for the, like, at least that first vital inch can be killed. So put down some compost and leave it alone. That's a huge healing step you can take.
Brings up another question, is that, I mean, hope this is okay. But it seems like a lot of the landscapers now currently, the current trend is to take out everything except for the plants that are growing, and then just have bare dirt wherever. Just make sure there's nothing growing there, and then somehow that looks good.
No, actually, that's a terrible practice. And sadly, what happens is people see it and they think it's what's supposed to happen. And then they tell their crew to do that. And of course, it's like a terrible party where nobody ever meets. In a natural environment, all the plants will kind of mesh, where you don't get the kind of dense crowding that creates molds and mildews and poor airflow. You get a gentle overlap that's just about right. And in any, like, go walk in the woods, or go, you know, walk on an open natural meadow, and you will see that all the plants coexist, and there are layers under the soil of roots, so that you'll get a succession of plants that follow each other. That happens very naturally, but if we interfere, what we get is an extremely artificial environment that actually has no life or health in it. And often those crews are not even trained to know the dead from the living. So you'll see meticulously pruned dead shrubs tucked in with all the live ones. They don't even spray paint them green. It's just left as a monument to ignorance. Read. Read.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the resources that we might use to find the right plants. In other words, you know, it's daunting. I mean, I love the idea of making a friendly place for hummingbirds and bees and other critters that enjoy pollinating. But what first steps can I take? You know, how can I figure out what's right for my yard?
Oh, and really good news that every county pretty much has put out natural care information on their websites that you can download as PDFs or just to look up. And they talk about, you know, protecting water quality, soil quality, air quality, and also lots and lots of offering information about native plants that are not just pollinator friendly and helpful for wildlife and beautiful in the garden, but they're also, a lot of the native plants are fire safe, or at least fire resistant. Not too surprising when you think about how fires have blazed through every forested area in the world over the, you know, millennia. But those resources are excellent. And also there's the Xerxes Society, which is Xerces. And that's been around for, I think it's one of the oldest, actually, pollinator protecting cult societies in the world. And they have wonderful, incredible website. And you can look by your state, by your region. So to say, you know, Eastern Washington, Western Washington, what are the plants that will be best for birds and bees and butterflies and so forth? How do I plant them? There's cultural information. There's all kinds of stuff on there. It's a really rich, wonderful site. Again, Xerces, Xerxes Society. And that's one of the best resources there is. Diane.
I have a question. Is there something that draws moles to the yard? It seems like every year we're getting more and more bumpy ground because of the moles.
Well, a lot of what happens here is the pollen. When pollen falls, and of course, pollen from evergreen conifers, is particularly sticky, and it doesn't just go away. And it certainly doesn't all meet its mate and start fruitful multiplication. So pollen can lie around and you can see it. The green stuff isn't always mold. It's really mostly pollen. And you'll see it running in rivulets down the road. You'll see it crusting your car, all over the place. And we get very heavy pollen years after important weather events. Well, we've had more 100-year weather events in the last decade than we had in the last century. So it's not surprising that we're having these huge pollen years. And then, of course, there is a lot of mold and mildew because of our perpetual damp climate, in that the mornings we get these gray marine mornings with the overcast skies. That kind of locks the moisture in, which is great, except that it also promotes, especially in crowded situations where plants are really clustered close, it promotes molds and mildews. So anytime you have a plant up close next to your house or a structure, you're almost invariably going to find a layer of mold and mildew on the wall behind that plant and on the plant itself. Is that what you meant?
I think she's
No.
asking about moles, M-O-L-E-S.
Oh, I'm
I
sorry.
wondered how I
moles.
was about moles.
Yeah. No, but meantime, okay, so moles are amazing animals, right? They are very territorial. Usually there's only 1 or 2 per acre, which is kind of amazing, but they're busy little creatures, and 1 or 2 will have a family, right? And they go, especially in places where there's relatively open soil and a lot of worms. One of their favorite habitats is overwatered lawns, because those are rich in worms. And by the way, none of the worms in the Northwest, this part of the Northwest, maritime, Western Washington, none of the worms are native here. They have all been imported accidentally or on purpose with
I heard that.
nursery plants and things. Because in the last glaciation period, it smothered everything and no worms came back. But interestingly, the moles will definitely, for preference, go to those areas that get excess water and excess plant food, because that feeds the roots that they're fond of. So to get rid of them, you have a couple of options. One thing I used to do is make small compost heaps at the edges of your property, because those will be areas that are rich in different kinds of worms and things that they like, and they will go to those areas in preference. Don't overwater your lawn, or maybe don't even water your lawn. Let it go brown in the summer, and that also will discourage them from coming in. There are a couple of things that they really dislike, some strong odors, for instance. So you can put a mixture of chopped mint and oregano and stuff and drop that down into the hole. That will usually kind of make them have at least another hole. You can also turn the hose on the hole, just shove it in the hole and run the hose, and you'll see the hole collapse as that whole lengthy tunnel gets filled with water. And that's a benign, kind way to do it. You're not gonna, I don't like the traps and the horrible things people do, poisons, but you can chase them away with benign neglect for the most part.
Okay, thank you.
And in the meantime, if you really wanted to know about mold, you'd now know a lot more about that, right? I would want to talk a little bit too about sort of some family-friendly Earth Day or Earth Month projects. And you don't have to stop at the end of April. We can do this all the time. One of the things my grandkids love to do is plant seeds and grow them. And so we do that all the time, all through the growing season. And I wanted to show you, this is my granddaughter's latest, it's zinnias. And she's repurposing a berry box and some kind of chicken container or something of that sort. And we always use, never, ever, ever buy material to plant stuff in, always reuse stuff straight out of the recycle bin. And we don't actually we try not to buy things in plastic containers as much as possible, but sometimes you're gifted them or whatever, and it happens. And one of the good news pieces is that they're reusable many, many times. And you can grow indoor greens that way, microgreens, and snip them off and put them in your salad. If you have older seeds of things like maybe radishes and cabbage and things like that, you're not too sure they're going to sprout well, sprinkle them in a little. As you can see, there's only about an inch or so of soil in here, and that's plenty for seedling starts. And then whatever sprouts come up, you can just harvest those and put them in your salads and enjoy them, and knock the container contents into the compost when you're done and start all over again, right? The other one that's really fun for them is sunflowers. And so Cecily tends to plant generously. So some of the pots have about 30 sunflowers in them and some have fewer. When they're young like that, and when they just have their first set of leaves, those are called the seed leaves, and they're not really doing much, but now they have the first set of true leaves. And when they get their second set of true leaves, you can gently tease them apart and put each one in its own container if you need to grow them on before you put them outside, or they can be teased apart and planted directly in the soil. And you will see soon some of these hundreds of sunflowers coming to you at the library and at the senior center, because she planted a lot, right? It's pretty great. I was showing earlier that my grandkids think that the recycle bin is their craft store. And there you can see the bounty, the rich and amazing bounty that can be repurposed into. In our house, it's made, they have a lot of toy mice. And so we have mouse houses and castles and dragon chasing. There's all kinds of wonderful mazes and things like that. And they can take them apart and put them back together. They've built robots out of tissue boxes and all that sort of thing. It's really fun. And it's challenging for them to use their creativity, but it also is challenging them to think about the fact that we don't just throw stuff away. I think that's really important, that children really learn to respect the value of materials. And sometimes we'll talk about, how did this piece of whatever it is start off in the world? Like if it's a piece of plastic, this came out of the ground as oil, right? And has been subjected to all these different things. And maybe it's recycled plastic. So maybe it's been 6 things already and we don't even know, or whatever. So they get a sense of, where each thing has come from. Something's made of cotton. What does that mean? It starts as seeds and it turns into a plant, and the boll of cotton is collected and cleaned, and you tell them the processes. And you can find wonderful little videos online to show them the process of many things, like following coffee or cocoa from a cocoa bean to the end product of hot chocolate. I think it's really a great idea to have kind of a regular time to do that with kids as a family or as grandparents or whatever, so that they really understand the whole full life of a product and how we can be more reciprocal and make sure that we just don't waste all these amazing natural products. So how about you girls? What are you thinking about? I mean, you have spent so much time trying to help people reduce their waste stream. I'm sure you have way more ideas than I do.
So Barbara and Diane are here basically to represent some of the recycling, the effort Zero Waste. And some of the zero waste is like turning it into a craft store for sure. But other ideas and guidance for us would be great.
Well, I would like to sort of segue using Anne's mention of using compost to make our soils healthy. At the June farmers market booth, so it's the second Saturday of every month, Zero Waste has a farmers market booth with a lot of information, varying themes. We're going to have a guest expert, Caitlin Newman from Kitsap County Solid Waste, and she's going to have a lot of materials about composting. She's going to have some countertop composting things to give away. I think that we will have, please correct me, Diane, but we have persistent rumors that there's going to be a new flyer about recycling and composting. And so those will also be available at our farmers market desk.
On June 11th?
Mm-hmm.
Is that the second Saturday of June? Yep.
Yeah, Kitsap County already has their new recycling flyer online, and they're trying to get Bainbridge Disposal to put it on their website. But they don't have the physical product yet.
Okay.
I'm writing that down.
Well, and there was one question that was in the original description of our conversation today. What really happens to our recycling? So I contacted Diane, sort of did an e-vite, so I was or an e-introduction. So I contacted the senior MRF manager, and our MRF is our Materials Recovery Center. So once Bainbridge Disposal picks up our curbside recycling, it eventually goes to our MRF in Tacoma, which is, hopefully we'll have another field trip. It's a fascinating place, and it's huge. And you can see they just dump trucks just pull up and dump stuff on the floor. And then it starts going through this elaborate and very expensive mechanical and people sorting process. And let me just at this point say, if you want to do wish cycling, please do not. You know, you might think something or hope something is recyclable, but if you put it in recycling, you're causing a problem at the end where they receive it and sort it. You're potentially contaminating a load of valuable recyclable material. So anyway, the senior MRF manager oversees the safety and operations of the 3 MRFs that Waste Management has in Washington. So I asked, have your end markets settled down since China stopped accepting recycling from the US, or do they remain in constant flux? You know, both in terms of value and destination. And he said, commodity values will always fluctuate based on demand and destinations. Our destinations are pretty consistent, except for overseas shipments, which have been impacted by the backlogs of ships waiting to get loaded or unloaded, and has made it extremely difficult to get space on a vessel going to the desired destination. So then I asked, because we worry about that, and I know we've all heard that our plastics are going to someplace they shouldn't be. So I asked if the end markets are regional, scattered across the US, or overseas. And he said, fiber grades such as OCC and mixed paper are regional.
OCC is cardboard.
Thank you. And that plastic grades and aluminum go to the east and southeast in the US to consuming mills. No plastic grades are shipped overseas. So that made me feel better. And then I said, if yes to overseas, which items are sent to which countries? So he said, some of our mixed paper continues to go overseas to 2 or 3 Pacific Rim countries. And then I asked about a question that comes up from time to time at the farmers market, people moving from Seattle over here, and they say, why is there such a difference between what Seattle accepts in recycling and what Bainbridge recycles? Because I think many of us might send some items with friends who work in Seattle over there to get recycled. So he said, Seattle's more interested in improving their diversion rate versus recycling rate. Take a drinking straw, for example. Is it recyclable? Yes. Does it get recycled? Almost never, as it is too small to recover and make a bale out of. Basically, if you say straws are recyclable and they are not due to not being recoverable, it just means a long and expensive trip to the landfill.
So I want to add to that. So for example, things are only valuable if they're like, if they can sell them, and they need to create bales to sell them, and bales is tons of material. So for example, the campaign signs, we have somebody in our group, Zero Waste Group, who's collecting these campaign signs, and the MRF will take them, but only if we make them as a special delivery, and only when we have 500 to 1,000 pounds of signs. So we, you know, Susan Nell, who's arranging this, is well, she's trying to figure out like where can those signs be stored, and then how can they go down there? I mean, and it costs, you know, it's gasoline to get them down there, you know, polluting. So there are a lot of moving parts, and well, so that's like, for example, that's not an accepted recyclable unless you make an effort to deliver a whole bunch at one time.
And we
I
have a question in the chat. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask about, you said diversion versus recycling. So Seattle is just trying to keep things out of the main waste stream, or?
I can't speak to Seattle's thought process behind this. You know, it's disappointing. Well, for instance, when he talked about straws, they can't make it through the MRF facility process because stuff gets put on a massive conveyor belts, and there are people there plucking things out, but small items slip down and can cause problems with the conveyor belt itself. So straws and plastic recycling are not a good material, just from that point of view. Diane?
And the thing with the diversion rate, so Seattle will figure out, okay, how much did they send to the landfill versus how much they sent to the MRF versus how much they sent to Cedar Grove compost. And then that gives them percentages. But then whatever goes to the recycling facility, well, all that might not actually get recycled. So their recycling percentage might be a certain number, but then once it leaves the MRF, that percentage diminishes, but it's not accounted for in there.
I get it. So it's like
it.
it might be what you measure is what you win. And if what they're trying to do is say, look how much tonnage we kept out of the landfill, but asterisk, some of that expensively ended up back at the landfill.
Exactly. It took a
And,
longer route. Yep.
And Anne, you had a question?
Just in the chat, Judy says, on the note about wish cycling, which I thought was a great phrase, what is the bottom line about number one plastic like berry containers? Because the sign at the dump says they do accept number one plastics, but we've often been told they don't.
So Caitlin Newman from Kids Up Solid Waste that Barbara mentioned, she just sent us an email saying that she's trying to get Bainbridge Disposal. I think they're helping them get new metal signs, and the new metal signs should just specify bottles, jugs, jars, and dairy tubs. And totally just forget the numbers. The numbers don't matter. It's the shape of the container, the kind of container it is for plastics.
Right, and just, I mean, I assume that many of you know this, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating, but the chasing arrow symbol in terms of recycling and identifying numbers at the bottom of a container are not useful information at all in terms of recycling, because recycling varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction and, within counties and all that kind of stuff. So just disregard that and really go by the shapes. In general, 1s and 2s are recyclable. In some communities, 5s are recyclable, but generally 3 through 7s are not. They are single-use plastic nightmare.
And let's amend that, Barbara. Number 1 and 2 bottles and
Right.
jugs. Not
Right.
containers, but bottles and jugs.
Right. So let me finish up with the last question that I asked this guy, and then we can go wherever we want to go about this. So I asked him, what are the top 5 items that they receive at the MRF that are the most problematic, and what would you like the public to know about them? So tanglers, garden hoses and cords, etc. Cassette tapes, those get in there and muck up the works. So there's the tanglers. Diapers. I don't know why people would think, hey, Diane and I went to a MRF once, and somebody put a bowling ball into recycling, and they had an artist in residence who I think that was the one who told us, or maybe Jane Martin told us, that you can slice bowling balls and they call it bowlerite. And you can use it in jewelry, but people are really clueless about recycling. Some people are. So diapers, raw garbage that contaminates other good recyclables, and needles and mechanical waste, which really surprised me, or medical waste. Who would put needles in recycling? But this was his top 5 of please don't.
And so they have to buy really expensive gloves for the workers so that if there is a needle, they won't go through to their fingers and they get poked. And then the tanglers, they're terrible because they have to stop the machinery in the MRF at least like twice a day for 30 minutes at a time to disentangle all the plastic bag handles and the hoses and cassette tape, like you said, to get it off there. They have these gears that sort of run the paper up, and that stuff gets wound around it, and they just have to stop the whole facility. So they lose about an hour a day just doing that.
And just a side note about paper, you know how you cannot recycle those flat plastic lids from your yogurt containers? It's because the machinery ends up sorting it into the plastic.
No, into the paper.
Into the paper.
Mm-hmm.
So
because it's flat.
Yeah, because it's flat. It's really about a lot about shapes too. So that's why, even though it's plastic, it can't go in there. So go ahead,
I
Anne.
interject that if you take those flat plastic lids and cut them in strips, they make excellent plant markers.
Good to know.
Right, with a Sharpie on them, and you can use them over year after year, because by the time the season's over, they faded out, and then you can write them on them again. I have some that are probably 7 or 8 years old, and they're still good.
And then I also wanted to, I did a little show and tell. We started this at the farmer's market booth last month. This is going to be noisy. I think you know about the large metal dumpster to receive metal at the Bainbridge disposal, right, at the transfer center. So you can take your barbecue or your lawn chairs or whatever. But all these things that we have, maybe a aluminum can lid that came off. If you buy peanut butter in a jar, the peanut butter lid, maybe a cap from some juice. I have a tea egg that won't cooperate, so I'm going to get rid of it. This paper clips that are bent out of shape and, you know, aren't any good anymore. Anything metal and small, we're going to start collecting at our zero waste farmers market booths. And we will take those in for people, assuming it doesn't become too burdensome. So save your little metal odds and ends, bits and bobs, because these are valuable materials and they shouldn't just be going into landfill. So we're trying to help people understand about the value of our discards. Not that they're going to go away, but they can be reused actually.
Second Saturday of the month at the farmer's market.
Exactly.
Hey, good job. Good idea.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, no engine blocks, just your little stuff.
Okay.
IKEA Allen wrenches.
I've heard that aluminum cans don't actually get recycled. Is that true?
Where did you hear that?
Several people have told me that, and I just thought that was really crazy.
Well, the only thing is, like, if you flatten, again with the shapes, if you flatten it flat, it can go in with the paper bale. And when it goes to the paper mill, they're not allowed to, whatever, they have to scoop off after they pulp everything. If there anything's left, they scoop it off, it's considered industrial waste. So they can't like take out the aluminum to recycle it elsewhere. So if flat cans end up at the paper mill, it's garbage. So that I can see where that they could, but otherwise I don't know why they would say that.
Because aluminum, isn't it like almost infinitely recyclable? I
Yes.
thought that was the
Yes.
beauty of aluminum, right?
Mhm.
And it's very high intensive energy to get it in the first place. So that's why it's really important to recycle it
It's
out.
a lot of energy.
But this stuff has to be clean, right?
Yeah,
Has to
I mean, yeah. Well, most aluminum is from soda cans though. So just make sure you empty the can. Isn't it most?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Beer, soda.
Yeah.
Adrian.
Hey.
How about plastic bottles with the little plastic lids on them? For a long time, it was like no lids, and now it is lids. Not
And now
sure.
it's back to no lids.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yep.
And
yep.
then flatten, then the way you just have to throw the lids away.
Yep.
Okay.
Well, except if you do Ridwell, at some point during the year, they collect those plastic lids and send them somewhere. And again, it's because they can get such a huge quantity. They're useful to whomever they're giving them to.
And then one other message is the plastic film that, you know, gets accepted at TNC or Safeway, that can never go in recycling. And yet some of our zero waste members out on walks have seen the recycling bins with a whole bag of plastic film in there. So, you know.
And when you say plastic film, you're talking about the very plastic bags that you can pull apart, right?
And
Right.
Or
Amazon
the
envelopes.
plastic around like a big roll of toilet paper, where you have 8 or 9 rolls of toilet paper.
Right.
That kind of plastic that
Right.
is very lightweight, but it doesn't, oh yeah.
So if you can push it and it doesn't, you know, well, that broke through. But if you can push it and it's stretchy, then that's the kind of plastic you can put in the grocery store.
And we
But
do.
not in your recycling, because it will
No,
mess
not
up
in your
the merge.
curbside, not in the
No.
transfer station.
It's recyclable, but not in your curbside recycling. It's a separate stream you have to go out of the way for.
And again, if you get Ridwell, that's one of the things, they collect that every week. The bottle caps is a special recyclable.
But so does TNC. You can bring it all
Yep.
rolled up to
And
TNC
Safeway.
and they'll take care of it. And I've seen it in the back in these huge bales. I guess they gather a large amount and then we'll bind it and send it off.
I think
So-
Safeway also collects the
Yeah,
plastic.
they do.
Yes. Yeah.
So that just reminded me, if I can put in a plug here, the Rotary auction is coming up and the last weekend in June is donation week. I think it starts Wednesday of that week. But if you would like to help with recycling efforts, that is just a huge, we create these huge bales of plastic that we take directly to the back of TNC, because we get their huge bags, just like you see back there. And we create those daily from Rotary. We have a green team. And so I would just encourage you, think about, like, if you want to help out at Rotary, the green team is a great place to help with. It's a lot of work, but everyone is so appreciative since the green team has come on the scene for Rotary, because things don't get thrown away, they get diverted instead.
Mhm.
It's
I know
absolutely
Jay Martin has a
essential.
booth which has been pulling stuff out that can be reused for artists. And she's created a whole another stream to like my grandkids, like interesting stuff that Rotary isn't going to be able to sell. But a lot of artists will stop by and collect raw materials from her, which I think is
Bowling balls.
Yeah. Well, you'd be surprised, because I chair the environmental working group for Rotary, and you'd be surprised what people do bring and how much Rotary has to spend or has spent in the past on getting rid of this stuff at the end of the auction. I mean, we're talking tens of thousands of dollars that we have to pay to throw some of it away. So, I mean, the intent is to try and stop it at the gate before some of the stuff comes. But you know how it is. There's hundreds of cars. It's really hard to gather all the information, all the stuff, and find out what really is in those white bags and boxes and things. So, yes, we are incredibly indebted to the green team and all the work of all of the people that have been historically involved. And we're looking forward to another great year. So, come sign up for this year. Are all of you?
So the auction will be, sorry.
Go ahead.
So the auction will be back in all its glory?
Well, we hope so. That's the plan. Yeah.
That's amazing. Okay.
Yeah. July 2nd is the actual day of the auction. And, usually the preceding week is the setup. So, yeah, it's going to be a great year, we think.
Good.
The other thing I just wanted to ask is, have you heard about what the city's doing with the Smart Climate Challenge? Yeah, that's pretty impressive.
Autumn rolled that out last night.
Were you on that call, Barbara?
Yeah, I was.
So was that, you couldn't see who else was on the call?
I couldn't see anything. I find those so bizarre. What we were talking about earlier. But I did think it was interesting. Did you, Diane? You look like you might have missed it.
I wasn't even on my calendar, so I forgot.
Well, the link is on the website, the city's website, and I think she's going to have a table at Earth Day in the park on Sunday, so we could talk to her about that. But it's a great way for people to identify behaviors that they could change, and it will end up calculating how much you're reducing your carbon footprint.
So this is Autumn Salmonak, who is working for the city.
Salmonak. She's the mitigation officer, related to climate issues. And this is a program they are just rolling out. So you could form teams with other households and challenge other teams. And, they just want a lot of participation, and they hope it goes until December. So you have enough months to really sort of, log behavior changes and the beneficial consequences from those changes.
Right. I think the premise is basically you can't reduce until you understand what you're producing, right? So how many tons of greenhouse gases are we, or individually, or as families, or as households, or as communities, how much are we producing? And then how much can we do to minimize and reduce? Because the city has set some very ambitious goals. They want to see 25% reduction from residents on Bainbridge Island. And of course, the major categories are electrical uses, if you have propane, energy, basically, transportation, and solid waste. I mean, right down your alley, because that all creates a increase in greenhouse gas emissions.
Well, that's one thing I was hoping to lobby for a little bit is, composting service is optional for residents on the island. And it's only an additional $10 a month. But if you put your food waste into landfill, it's going to generate greenhouse gases. If you put your food waste into compost, it's going to become compost and benefit the earth. So, you know, that's one easy choice to make, and $10 a month, you know,
Right.
what is that? 3
And
cups of coffee or something?
methane is much more damaging to the environment than just CO2. So
And-
methane is what comes from landfills when you commingle, you know, compost and other things. So there's so many areas for improvement. It's exciting.
Read.
So when we're talking about commercial composting, I've been composting my fruits, vegetables, and all the other stuff that comes out of the garden or the yard that doesn't end up back in the mulched on the grass or whatever. But there are more things if I go with commercial composting. If I pay that $10 or whatever, I can put more kinds of food in there, right? More oils or meats or things like that are also allowed. Is that right?
Not oils, but meats. And even with bones, not like big ham hocks or anything like that. And you can also put any compostable paper that says it's compostable or BPI certified.
Well, no, just like, it's easier just because people just don't, there's so much greenwashing language on these products. It's just easier just to go, they just really want to stick with paper towels and paper napkins. And if you have a greasy pizza box that doesn't have a sticker on it or anything, put the greasy part of the pizza box in the compost. And that's it.
But then, of course, anytime you cut you trim your trees or your bushes or whatever, you can put that all in there too.
Oh, yeah.
All of that is compostable. So, you know.
And the other thing I would like to urge people, Diane and I took a class about 1.5 years ago called Beyond Plastics, and taught by a woman who's a former regional director of the EPA. And after she retired, when President Obama's term ended, she looked around and like, what is an issue that really needs more attention that's not getting it? And she settled on plastics. And, you know, we think about, oh, plastics in the water, plastic pollution that way. But she is thinking about it and teaching about it from the extraction process, which is just an environmental nightmare and really a polluting process, through the processing, which is another environmental and polluting process, to the end. You know, there's just not, aside from medical uses, the whole story of plastic is really an huge environmental problem. And the petrochemical industry can see the writing on the wall in terms of electric vehicles. And so their plan B is to increase plastic production. I mean, like triple it. And the other thing to be aware of is, you know, all these extractive and processing plants are most often in lower income communities.
Right.
So there's an environmental justice component to this. So to the extent that you can forego plastic in your shopping and your purchases, please do so. It's really important. It might seem small, but the more of us that do that, you know, the less demand for plastic.
And so
The other
Rotary is
thing-
taking up, are you going to talk about that, Winifred? What
I was
Rotary
just-
okay.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, you.
All right. The other thing I was just going to add to what Barbara said was that we think of plastics as, you know, yogurt dishes out in the environment, but we are now inhaling microplastics. All of us have plastic in us now because of the decomposition of plastics. It really never goes away. It just gets smaller and smaller. And they were showing pictures in the ocean of like fish that they've cut open that have plastics, like little plastic balls. And it's just pretty astonishing.
And it's in water too. So the water you drink, even tap water, municipal tap water that's been through sewage treatment, whatever, that water has microplastics in it. And there's, you know, it's been estimated that the average person gets a credit card worth of plastic. How often, Diane, do you remember?
Once a week.
Once a week, yeah.
We're
Come on,
consuming
bottled water has the same plastic in it. It's not different from tap water in that respect.
And in fact, I heard they think that bottled water has twice as many microplastics because of the friction of removing the bottle cap.
Also,
Wow.
those cups, like a hot cup that's lined with plastic, the heat releases a good proportion of that plastic. So those are particularly migratory.
And there's nanoplastics in tea bags.
Mhm.
So,
Oh, and you wonder why cancer rates keep going up? You know, I mean, it's pretty scary.
So reuse, reduce and reuse. Try to
Right.
just bring things, you know, bring your own mug, bring your own water bottle that you can reuse, and
bring your own utensils.
Right, and that's a big thing that's going to be different this year at the Rotary auction. There's not going to be pallets of bottled water for people to gobble down. You have
We
to
are
bring your
s-
own water. I mean,
We
it
are
takes,
so happy about that. I can't tell you.
well,
Yeah, and I do think we do the Chili Hilly here every year,
right,
and we have started. I mean, it's in a plastic bottle, but we get the water from a service for water here, and rather than serving water out of little bottles, we put the dispenser for the water cooler out there, and people filled their own containers, and it
right.
worked great. I had no complaints. Did you, Barbara?
Good.
None at all.
oh,
And
great.
people, you know, we had the holy trinity for waste streams, which was, you know, a container for composting and marked as composting and showing what you can put in there. One for landfill and one for recyclables. And the Chili Hilly riders were really, they knew their stuff, and they were also really appreciative of it. And that's one thing that I know Diane would echo, that when we do the waste stream diversion at various events, most people are just really glad to be able to do it.
Now, if I am a organizer of an event,
Mhm.
could I reach out to Zero Waste to think about how I might be able to do this less intensively?
Why, yes, you could read.
And that's what Rotary did. We got a lot of guidance from Diane because we're not experts, but she was able to give us a lot of guidance. So thank you.
And for
Diane.
example, the Historical Society is having a little fundraiser, and they're coming tomorrow to the Tableware Lending Library to pick up some buckets for compost, so their attendees can put their food waste in there.
And in case you're not aware of it, Diane mentioned the lending library. You know, Zero Waste has this whole library of items you might need for a large party. So tablecloths, napkins, silverware, glasses, plates. So if you know of anybody who's having a big party or an organization that's having an event, they can come and borrow things for free, return them clean, and that's it.
Yep. So
That's a great
we're
resource.
Zero Waste. Oh, yeah. Bye, Adrian.
Bye. Oh,
You know,
So
one thing
what
that boggles my mind is that I think when I was a child, there were no plastics in the world.
know.
You know, we had
No, how
aluminum.
did we survive? Wow.
I know, but isn't that an interesting thing that there really wasn't? And then there just began to be plastic toothbrushes. I remember those were one of the first things I ever saw, right? And then all the straws were paper back then and things like that, right? Bread came in a paper bag that was like a waxed paper and had a semi-transparent window, but there wasn't, you know, there wasn't this proliferation of plastic until really into the 60s, right? And it's just been such a, yeah, you know, everybody laughs about that Mrs. Robinson movie, what the Graduate, plastic, right? Yeah, and that's really this explosion that in relatively short time really has 60 years to destroy natural environments in an incredibly huge way. And I
On the
think
positive side, we were living without it so recently that it shouldn't be that hard.
right.
we should be able to get back to that.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like the technology is not lost to us. Why, you know, let's really put the consumer pressure on to make sure that companies and corporations start. And that's what, you know, you vote with your pocketbook and you write letters and you stand up and talk and you advocate and you get change.
Well, that's the other thing. So if you do, you know, choose not to buy a product because of its packaging, let that company know. Like, I would really love to, you know, buy this, but, you know, I just can't accept the current packaging because it's not recyclable. And, you know, I don't want single-use plastics in my life. I hope you'll consider finding more responsible packaging.
And if you like to tweet, they say that's an effective way. I don't do it, but to use Twitter to call out the company on Twitter, then they're more likely to respond to you.
Mhm.
And
Because
there-
because they pay people to be social media guidance. And so it's like, oh, it shows up on a metric. and-
Right.
And then there have been a lot of groups beyond plastics, like Barbara mentioned, and Break Free from Plastics, and that have brought national legislation on plastic reduction. So whenever you see that happening, right in support of that too, show your support for that.
Mhm.
But we might get to a point in our society, not too long from now, hopefully, that people will actually carry around a spoon and a knife the same way they carry around a plastic bottle or a jug for their drinking water, some kind of, yeah. Oh, you do it already? Well,
Mhm.
Barbie, you're just ahead of the game.
Well, Back to the Future, because when the board of directors at the senior center recently went to the Suquamish Museum, we learned that one of the things that Suquamish youth would get was a spoon, and you'd have a spoon for as long you. That's part of your basic necessity for life. So you carry your spoon around on
Cool.
your hip.
Well, it would hook to your belt, and
Yep.
right with other, like you would have a knife, you would have a spoon,
And your
some-
phone, and
and
your
a-
iPhone.
And your iPhone, exactly.
Which has its own set of disposable issues.
Well, I want to thank you guys. This was very informative, and I'm sure a lot of people who, even those who are not here, might get a catch of it on YouTube. And I learned a lot. I learned things that you guys think of because you talk about it all the time. I had no idea. So thank you.